this thing on? So I'm gonna let you know this time that I'm recording.
When?
Right now. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how vulnerable do you think I am with you?
Now?
Yeah, now.
Almost a 9.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how vulnerable was I with you when I first met you?
You weren't on the scale.
I was off the scale?
Yeah, on the other side, like whatever comes before 0.
Okay. All right. Alrighty then. Welcome to episode 3. I think this episode is really a jump off to everything I'm trying to explore with this format. It's a challenge for me to actually do the things that are in my mind in regards to this podcast, only for the fact that I've mostly shown the world an extremely edited version of myself and my life. But for this to work, I gotta let that shit go. If I don't move accordingly with the intentions I had in my mind at the start of this, then I'm not really moving at all. And not moving at all feels like paralysis. And I've been way too blessed to consider that as an option. So, without further ado, let's get into it. I'm gonna dive right into this subject with no life raft. And knowing that nobody's coming to save me once I jump. The reason nobody will come to save me is that nobody wants to. And to speak of this topic publicly is to embrace the issue alone. Today, I'm gonna chat about vulnerability, and specifically the vulnerability or lack thereof of men and my own. I can't remember a time when being vulnerable with anyone was a good thing for me. Although I know it's a good thing for me, it doesn't necessarily feel good to me. I guess maybe when I was a kid, I could be vulnerable with my family in some kind of kid way. But as a kid, all you are is vulnerable. So that doesn't really count. As soon as I started going through puberty, it was immediately known and felt that I was gonna need to be strong and most definitely silent. At least in regards to any feelings that someone else could possibly interpret as weakness. Literally, as I speak right this moment, I can imagine every single one of my friends, and most men in general, just pursing their lips, sucking their teeth just a bit, and immediately moving on to another podcast that's less intrusive or easier to digest or less whack in general. Ain't nobody got time for this shit during a pandemic. But actually, I think this is the perfect time for it, if there ever is a perfect time. Also, even though they probably wouldn't admit it to my face, they think I'm soft or reaching just to create content for this podcast. And for those who know me well and have so for a long time, I'm positive somewhere in their minds there's a voice saying, "Here he goes again." And that voice would be justified because sometimes I'm extra. Or maybe the voice is my own because I've had to create one. I've had to create an adversary to show that there's strength in what I'm doing, because otherwise, if I'm not doing something to win, how do I justify even bringing up the subject of vulnerability? I don't know. But what I do know is that it shouldn't be this hard to talk about something so completely mutually human. But I guess in a world that promotes scarcity at just about every turn, the thought of admitting to being vulnerable feels like an invitation to every known and unknown enemy to storm the gates and take what little is left. My soul, my pride, my dignity, my love, my self-respect. Because for me, vulnerability is all those things. It's fear of full exposure, an unnecessary emotional, naked dance through a quiet meeting of everyone I've ever respected, loved, and admired. It's embarrassment. But here I am, running naked through your ears for the world to hear. Oh well. For anyone who's grown up an only child or known one personally, you know that friendship to an only child means everything and nothing simultaneously. We grow up by ourselves, so we're comfortable with ourselves. But the flip side of that is that because we have no siblings, we cherish our friends a bit deeper than usual. I know I have all through my life up until recently. And I say up until recently because then as an adult, honestly, it hasn't paid off to treat other men like brothers. A few, but mostly no. It's been seen as a weakness. And even my closest friends, who I consider brothers simply because of the amount of life we've shared together, my ability to be vulnerable with them has been limited at best. And I can admit that part of it is my fault. Shit. Maybe it's all my fault. There's been so many times when I needed a brother or a father, and all I had was my friends. Some of whom also needed fathers themselves, so couldn't really provide much guidance. And some of my friends had both fathers and siblings. And trust me, when I tell you that the feeling of being the third wheel between fathers and sons, or with brothers and siblings in general, is horrendous. But as an only child of a single mother, I experienced that often going over to friends' houses. And what I desperately needed was right in front of me. But it was to witness rather than experience. Moments like those when I was around friends with fathers and brothers and sisters, it resembled being on a field trip to the zoo. And I felt like a cub on the other side of the glass, observing a lion and lioness surrounded by their cubs, all frolicking around and biting each other's ears and feet, and learning to socialize with their siblings and hunt safely with a slight nudge of encouragement and a watchful eye from Dad. But when I went home, all I could do was to hopefully imitate as best I could what I had seen. But without having the actual experience, imitation was the best I could hope for. Let me take a second to let you in on something, just so you don't think that sharing all this is just part of who I am. I need to stress to you that what you just heard is the first time I've ever shared anything as sheltered and tucked away as those thoughts and feelings. Some folks can hear that and go, nah, it's okay. I talk about that kind of thing all the time with my friends. And you know what? I bet those folks are called women. Because men don't do that shit. Our inability to show vulnerability without the sense that there's gonna be a price to pay afterwards in regards to our manhood runs deep. And once you have that mindset, there's just no upside to opening yourself up. If you believe what you say will or may be used against you openly or in silent judgment, in friendship or in business, then the feeling of getting something off your chest by revealing yourself to someone isn't what's achieved. And as a man, you may feel even more weight added because you probably won't receive any kind of visual or vocal cue from other men acknowledging that what you did was even worth the risk. Men will gamble their children's college money away before they'll gamble on the belief that their emotional expression can be a strength rather than a weakness. And it doesn't matter whether that belief is a reality or just a kind of emotional paranoia based on conditioning. The results are tangible and lived out every single day. What the world experiences through the actions of men who don't have the means or support to express themselves is as vast as the variety of men themselves. Here's what I mean. A man who cannot express his emotions, regardless of his reasons, isn't hard to detect because we all look and act the same. We look sturdy, we look dependable, we look interesting, we look dangerous. We make jokes, we become lawyers, we buy flowers, we beat women and children, we kill other human beings, we baptize them as well. We dress in overalls, we dress in tailored suits. We're called fathers, uncles, brothers, sons. We expect nothing and we demand everything. We take because there's not enough for everyone. We show everything we have to give because all that we are is often seen as only as much as we've been able to accumulate. Whether that be women or cars or homes or always money. And so all this is to say that if you've ever seen a man, you have most likely seen an emotional recluse, moving through life with the parts of his body that he hopes will protect him best. And by him, I mean the outward image he projects. Because what's beyond that is truth. And truth is the holy grail every man is born with and afraid to have. Let's talk about women. Are women mean to vulnerable men?
I think a lot of times women don't know how deal with being treated well. And so they see that as something to manipulate or something to kind of control in their own way instead of seeing that as a strength.
Before I get started, let me just say that in this age of, well, not all blah blah blahs are blah blah blah, doing that will never serve you and only displays your inability to possibly consider that there's a reality that may be much different than yours, that others are experiencing. So, if what I say in regards to the relationships between men and women does not fit inside your cookie jar, I'm providing you the opportunity to reach inside mine and pick up what I've put in there. Or you can kick rocks and wait around for someone else to provide a more digestible treat. Anyways, there's things I don't hear from men when they talk to women in public forums, and it drives me crazy. Before I get to those things, I just want to say that most times the things I'm going to say aren't said because, drum roll please, women are just as inconsiderate and degrading of men's feelings as other men. But what women may or may not realize is that a woman's disregard for a man's feelings hurts way more than when another man disregards them. And the aftermath tends to last much longer. And by the way, I'm speaking from a heterosexual male point of view. Obviously, there's an entire spectrum of perspectives regarding masculinity. I'm just speaking from my own little ray of light. Women's words hurt and confuse men more than other men's because men expect women to be different than men. Women are different than men. Otherwise, there'd be no distinction. A man is at his most vulnerable around a woman. Even the worst of men. The most disgusting men actually reveal the depth of their vulnerabilities via their disgusting behavior. A man who reaches out and touches a woman in a bar and violates the sanctity of her private space is attempting a coup, an immediate seizure of power. And men who use physical power as a means of interacting with a woman or dominating a woman clearly don't feel as if revealing themselves to women authentically is an option of expression that will benefit them. And even if that door were open, would they have done the self-work ahead of time needed to even walk through it? And let me be clear, I'm not saying it's a woman's fault. I'm not blaming women for men's assault on them. It's the man's ineptitude, his willingness to clearly cross a woman's boundaries rather than emotionally expand his own, that creates a moment like that. So I'm not an expert on this subject, as I'm sure you can tell. Everything I suggest is based on what I've experienced and what is, rather than what I wish it to be. Regardless, women highly underestimate the power they have to influence a man's relationship with himself. And as a result, his ability to express them to the world in healthy ways. Without getting into the right or wrong of it, women are expected to encourage the more caring and sociable parts of humanity. And it's ridiculous because that may or may not happen, because women aren't some monolithic organism that all provide the same thing. But in general, I believe this to be true across the board, worldwide. But how can the most well-intentioned woman show a boy the importance of emotional vulnerability if the men he knows he's growing up to be like don't have it in themselves? Or they see vulnerability as a distinctly feminine and therefore less than human trait? This is just a question. I'll save that discussion for folks smarter than myself. But this moment in time, this discussion is my feeble attempt at bringing it to the table. I think that it's a mistake to say that men are out of touch with their emotions. I think that men are just uneducated and misguided when it comes to what to do with the emotions they are in touch with. Growing up, I lived in a trailer park on the outskirts of Aurora, Colorado, and less than a block off the state's most infamous street, Colfax. I saw all sorts of men in that trailer park and coming off that street. I also took the city's most notorious bus on its most notorious street to school as a kid, the 15. I saw all kinds of men on the 15. And as a kid and young man without a father in my life, I was extra keen to watch how the men around me acted. White men and black men acted differently in a lot of ways, but they all acted the same when it came to what I call walls of silence and walls of violence. And if someone was able to climb the first, then the second one was waiting. This also had to do with where I was and the kind of men in those places I traveled through, day in and day out. Allow me to just generalize based on my experiences. Men who live in trailer parks have less options in life, and men with less options in life in America tend to lean towards the idea that violence is always a possibility for them or to be used against them at pretty much every moment of the day throughout their life. Violence wasn't always physical. It was verbal, it was mental, and even though I doubt they knew it, it was also spiritual, in the way that a man's willingness to embrace some sort of violence can be felt immediately when you're around it enough. And on the 15, I was around it enough. Vulnerability for those men, regardless of whether they were good or bad men, was non-existent to the outside world. It was a wall. Keeping your mouth shut and your eyes forward was the respect I saw men give each other. when either a word or a look was exchanged out of anger or annoyance, sometimes by accident. It was most surely a sign that the first wall of silence had been breached, and the second wall of violence was the only thing standing between the world and whatever those men had worked their lives to create and hide within themselves. Violence was their protection, and as I got older, it became mine. But I'll talk about how I thought masculinity was supposed to be expressed growing up in another episode. As I grew up, and examples of masculinity expanded around me. The parts that I'm speaking to now did not. I've known rich men, poor men, happy men, sad men, good, bad, quiet and loud, peaceful and violent, but never, to this day, have I met a man who openly took a moment to express that he placed any value on the idea of openness and vulnerability. It's as if it simply doesn't exist in the world of men. And it's definitely not on the list of casual subject matter. I don't even know if I would be receptive to it if someone approached me. I'd definitely have to be in a mood. When a man asks another man, "Hey, what's good?" 90% of the time, you won't get much more than, "I'm good, man. I'm good, bro. How about you?" And 9% out of the remaining 10, they may slightly elaborate on something that happened at work or with their wives or girlfriends or kids or something they purchased, etc. So that 1% remaining is pretty much what I'm aiming for. I'm not looking for tears or anything as crazy as that. I'm just looking to exchange honest insight. I'm pretty sure if any of my friends would ever even listen to this, they would feel some kind of way about it. I would hope they would let me know face to face if they feel uncomfortable, so we could then talk through it. But I'm not holding my breath. And I'm also not holding it against them. Most of us just don't have the framework for it, including me. But after years and years worth of thinking about it and cringing at the lack of depth in men's conversations, I've come to the conclusion that if I were to just work on this by myself, because as a man, you're supposed to figure things out on your own, if I were to just keep this to myself, I would be defeating the purpose of thinking about it in the first place. My opinion is that encouraging men emotionally is even greater than helping them financially. Because often what men do with their lives directly reflects who they are emotionally, whether they care to admit it or not. So, moving forward to this week's guest, I've definitely shared some fun moments with these guys, and we've clearly shown that we have a mutual respect for one another. But I can honestly say that I've never gone too deep with them. And not that I'm even trying to go that deep now. But for men, oftentimes, because of everything I've just spoken to, and lots more, even the most basic attempt at talking to something deeper than our financial and material highlight reels can be misconstrued as getting all deep in shit. but I'm hopeful. I think most of the men I surround myself with are open to self-reflection, even if they think what I'm doing is weird or worthless or both. Listen, coming on here isn't like going on Oprah and Oprah telling the world that your feelings are real and valid, and then afterwards you get a book deal and the risk you took going on there to be vulnerable all paid off because now you're Oprah's friend. No. It's just Porter talking to you about some shit that will most definitely not provide you a path to a movie or a book deal. But it will, if allowed to. If talked about in conversations that come up later in life, show that vulnerability was addressed as a man, and you live to talk about it. Thanks for hanging out, and make sure to check back in to see how things are going with my guest. Till then, be good.
It's tricky because the thing is, a man, I feel like if you have to think about it too hard, he's just probably not digging you. Men are pretty simple. And even if a man doesn't know how to be vulnerable at first, but he wants to or he's trying to, you'll know just by the way that he treats you.